Hey everyone, and welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. I'm your host, Drew. We're going to break down some pretty cool stuff today. We got Xmen Apocalypse and a look at the Earth of the future. Stick around, you don't want to miss this.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the show. As I said, I am Drew. We're going to talk about some pretty cool stuff on this week's episode. First off, I want to get into it because it's brand new, on everyone's mind. I want to talk about the new X-Men film, Xmen Apocalypse. All right. Now, it stars James McAvoy. He's coming back as Professor Charles Xavier. We got Michael Fassbender as being brilliant in this particular film. Really saves it a lot of points. He returns as Magneto. We do have Jennifer Lawrence coming back to return as Mystique, and a whole host of new people that have come in. They brought in a lot of folks to round out the cast, and we're going to get into some juicy details and talk about some stuff that may have, caught your attention, a little mistakes that may have been made here and there, but we're not going to dog on it too bad. We also want to talk about, or I want to address the future of that particular franchise. Now, the film itself, okay, let's talk about the fact, first of all, that this movie takes place in 1983, okay? 1983. Now, what Days of Future Past was supposed to do is it was supposed to go back in time to the 70s, mix up the continuity, mix up everything that later occurred. So it was essentially supposed to take out X-Men Origins Wolverine, X-Men, X2, and X3 and the Wolverine, because those took place after all those three. So it was supposed to essentially retcon the entire series, but leave the X-Men First Class and Days of Future Past, and now this one, okay? So when you look at the film, it takes place in 1983. The first one in continuity being X-Men First Class took place in 1962. There is 21 years between First Class and Apocalypse. And when you think about that, if you haven't seen it, if you go in thinking about that, or if you happen to just give it a little tinkering in your mind when you step out of the movie, that the fact that it was 21 years between the first and this one, no one has aged a day. Everyone looks exactly the same in 83 as they did in 62. And if you think about it, in 1962, where Professor Xavier was getting his doctorate at the time, so he would have been 24, 25, 26 years old, he should be pushing 50 in this movie. McAvoy, his hair is longer, but he doesn't look any different. The only character in this series that can get away with looking exactly the same is Mystique, because she can look exactly however she wants to look at any point in time. Now, Mystique is this own thing, okay? Now, I get it. The contractual obligation for Jennifer Lawrence, for J-Law, to come back and do this film was there, but clearly didn't want to go through all of the measures that she had gone through before. Look at the promotional material for this film. I'm not talking about fan-made art or anything. I'm talking about actual Fox-designated stamp of approval material that showcases the X-Men on any poster or advertisement. And if Mystique is on there, she's not blue. She's not blue. It's just Jennifer Lawrence looking like Jennifer Lawrence with a blonde wig, or at least I assume it's a blonde wig. She's not blue for 90% of this movie because she just didn't want to do that stuff anymore. And why would you cover up that franchise? And especially, I imagine that she got paid buku bucks for this film. But they try to explain it away in the film. They try to, at some point, show that she's some kind of mutant hero and she doesn't want to be recognized. And so Xavier's like, oh, so that's why you're not in your natural blue form. It's just a shoehorned device that necessitates her being white-faced, blonde-haired Jennifer Lawrence throughout the film, throughout most of it. Which, you know, take it or leave it, whatever. She's in it, and it's kind of whatever. It wasn't the biggest drawback of the film, and really the age gap, you know, between 62 and 83 and everybody looking exactly the same, that wasn't really the weak point of the film either. If we're going to look at the things that were done right in this movie, so I don't want to slag on it the whole time, because there were things that were done really well. Bringing in the characters that would become, which were supposed to be the first cast people, such as Jean Grey and Scott Summers. I didn't like who they got for Scott Summers, but they brought in these characters. They're young enough, or they were young enough in this film to have it make sense that they're in high school. They're young. We do see a little bit, spoiler, 1, 2, 3, we do see a little bit of the Phoenix let out at a certain point in this film. But even with the introduction of these characters, they bring in Nightcrawler, they bring in Angel, Storm, Psylocke. They have a lot of these characters in the film that fan favorites that people get excited about. But the problem of these films that at least Singer has been a part of is underutilization. He brings in and he teases you with these certain characters, gives them a couple flashpoints, and then all of a sudden they're gone or nothing happens with them. A character like Nightcrawler is, amongst comic book fans, one of the favorites. He was a really bright spot in X2. Could have done a lot with that character, but they wanted to focus more, of course, on what's going on with Magneto and what Apocalypse is trying to do and who he's going to use. So they really focused a little bit more on Jean Grey in this film. Going to that point, talking about Scott Summers, as I previously mentioned, didn't really care for the actor that much. I just don't like the Scott Summers with Tude, you know. There's maybe one scene in this movie where he and Professor X talk to each other, and Scott Summers is supposed to be his boy. He's supposed to be the golden child, Boy Scout, future leader of the Xmen, and he's mostly just annoyed, and he's basically the kid from the city that gets transplanted to the country. You know, you've seen that 1,000 times, like, I'm so bored and everything's so blah. It's really angsty, which, I mean, he's a teenager, fine, but the angst was palpable. Almost really no chemistry with Jean Grey in this particular film. Just I wasn't getting it between them. Didn't see it. Maybe it'll happen. The next movie they make is supposed to take place in the 90s. Who knows? I mean, they'll probably still be the same cast. They'll just be like, oh, it's 10 years later, but my hair is slightly longer. I don't know how we're going to make this work. But in that case, they're going to move along with those characters. The other big one that I gotta say is the heavy misuse of Storm. Outside of all the other things and all the other problems that people might have with this film, the fact that they brought in Storm, had Apocalypse amplify her powers to where she could control the weather throughout the Earth, just as Magneto was able to control the metal and stuff throughout the Earth. They didn't do anything with her. Apparently, to Bryan Singer and Simon Kinberg, the coolest thing you can do with weather is just shoot lightning at people. Now, there's a point in this movie, spoiler 1, 2, 3, where the mansion blows up. It's just a typical explosion that necessitates Quicksilver doing his cool slow-mo stuff. But it could have been so much cooler. They could have had Storm building an F5 tornado that just rips up the mansion, and as hail, the size of smart cars, just rips through the building and tears it down. It could have been cool. She could have been causing hurricanes and tsunamis, blizzards around the equator. She could have been doing so much more in this movie. Instead, the skies get kind of gray, and she hurls lightning at somebody. She might as well be Thor at this point. heavily underused character. But that just goes to show is as much as there's enjoyment in the movie where there's these few flashes, it's just kind of boring. It's kind of a boring flick. The scripts of these movies are dog excrement. Every single movie is Xavier pleads to Magneto in this costume. Xavier tries to get Magneto to wisen up and love everybody in this costume. It's the same beat just repeated over and over again, and apparently just 20 years apart from each other, I guess it's going to be. It's always the same thing. It's this optimism that they're always trying to bring in that they can never let go of, but they can't just let the X-Men do other things about saving the planet that may have nothing to do with mutant relations. Every single movie's been about mutant relations. So I think at this point, is this time for Singer to step down? I think they got to let somebody else take the reins of this franchise. If it were me, I would take a look at the great work that Tim Miller did with Deadpool. Very faithful to the source, very faithful to the X-Men even in this film. In Deadpool, if you watch it, the costuming that Negasonic Teenage Warhead wears, it didn't look tacky. Colossus was super cool, and it's something that you can create and make more exciting for the future if Fox plans to retain this property and never give it back to Marvel. All right, so that wraps up that segment. You are listening to the Golden State Media Concepts podcast show. We'll be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. This is Drew, still with you on the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi podcast. Now that we've gotten that new summer fun out of the way, I want to dive deep here into the science fiction world that is the future Earth, okay? Now, we're going to talk about a few things here. We're going to go about the different versions of Earth that are contained in these films and television shows. The first one I want to go into, okay, is I want to talk about the Utopian Society. And everybody's got a favorite. They've been making films about the utopian Earth of the future, when there's no more war, there's no more disease, there's no more any of that stuff, and everything's perfect. Or is it? Now, a lot of the famous ones that are involved in these particular utopian films, there's a couple different angles they go with as far as what is it that's going to ultimately destroy the utopian society. In science fiction, a utopian society exists only to be drugged down. It never survives the actual story. The first one that has made some pretty good films, there's the Utopian Society that has some type of resistance or outcast or underground or some type of system that's trying to fight against the great society that is their utopia. And some of those films will have the government either doing something that isn't really cool, it's morally objectionable. You look at something like Soylent Green, well, there's not really a resistance effort. It's a full utopian society. Everybody's getting along, but they don't know how the sausage is made. And of course, I mean, if you haven't seen it or know the line at the end, Soylent Green, it's people. Yeah, that's what they've been doing this whole time. The people don't know how the sausage is made. Then they find out, ruins everything, okay? Another one, Logan's Run, is another one of those. It's a very kind of Brave New World-y type situation. Another one you can get into, a fairly new one, is on The 100. It's a television show. It's on the CW. I catch it on Hulu, is where I watch it at. second season of the show. The show evolves around, it's post-apocalyptic at first. In nature, it's post-apocalyptic, but they find this society living in a mountain that is utopian. Everything seems perfect, as it always does, and then they find out that the ruling class is doing something naughty, and then they go and tear the whole world down. So the utopian films are interesting. It's always trying to raise a point, usually about the society that you're living in and what it takes to be living in peace. What does it take to remove aggression and war and all of these other things that would otherwise have crumbled society? Because most of these films and most of the television shows that involve utopian societies are all recognizing something that either A, had destroyed society or was about to destroy society, and then they had to clean it up. If you want to have a little fun with the Utopian Society, Demolition Man, starring Sly Stallone. It's got, who's in it? Stallone, Sandra Bullock, Wesley Snipes. His name is John Spartan. John Spartan. That had to be a suggestion from Stallone. That's a utopian movie. I know it's ridiculous. I mean, it's an action movie, but it kind of ends up being a comedy, maybe not on purpose. But that's a utopian one. And the utopia is destroyed because there is that underground effort that old No Cure for Cancer Dennis Leary kind of does his shtick in. But there's also the ruling class that brings Simon Phoenix, a.k.a. Wesley Snipes, wearing some sweet overalls and rocking that awesome blonde do, brings him back to cause an uproar, to cause the Utopian Society to have to go to war with the Underground and destroy them. It's a whole thing. And, of course, John Spartan puts on his sweet beret and then goes to work, working with the Underground. Usually the hero always finds something redeemable in the Underground and becomes their champion and ends up overthrowing it. Now, if you want to watch a little bit more serious kind of version of that, one where there's a version of the Utopia where everybody does recognize and everybody does know what the government's doing in order to maintain peace, which in a case like Brave New World or in this film, Equilibrium. In Equilibrium, I don't know if you guys out there have watched this one. It's sort of a cult classic. Came out in the early 2000s, if not 2000 itself. Kind of got swallowed up by the Matrix. I first saw it back in, I want to say 2004, when I heard that this guy, Christian Bale, was cast to be Batman. And I hadn't seen any of Christian's work before. I hadn't seen Reign of Fire. I hadn't seen American Psycho. I hadn't seen Equilibrium. And unlike other kids, I wasn't raised on Newsies. I was always watching The Princess Bride. So I wasn't really familiar with Christian Bale's work. And I went back and I watched Equilibrium. Equilibrium is really the one that got me excited for him to play Batman. And in Equilibrium, it's a future society. It's semi-post-apocalyptic. They do mention a World War III and then what they're going to do to not have a World War IV, and they develop this drug, Prozium, oddly enough sounds like Prozac, that makes you not feel anymore. And the concept of no emotions, okay, I mean, you want to believe that if no emotions exist, you don't actually speak. Like, the whole nature of interaction or thought or anything is kind of based on emotions. But whatever. They work that through. He's super badass in this movie. And his thing is about he stops taking his medicine. He's starting to feel things. Some really beautiful scenes regarding classical music and everything and how he is processing these emotions and what he's trying to do to help him and his family, because he has a family in this one, and what they do. And that is another one of those ones where he finds the Underground, becomes their guy, and then eventually topples the Great Society. I just watched that one again here in the last couple of days. Great movie. Check it out. It's on Netflix. If you don't have it, you can go ahead and check it out. Equilibrium. Got Christian Bale. Sean Bean is in it for a few minutes, of course. Taye Diggs is the other guy that's in it. It's a good flick. I would definitely catch it. And if you haven't seen it in a while, do what I did and watch it again. So those are the utopian ones. And then there's the standout. There's the one that defies all of those, and that's Star Trek. if you think about one of the brilliant things that Star Trek does is it offers you a future Earth that is a utopia with no BS. There's no baggage. There's no underground intent on destroying what the Federation has built. They used alien contact to unify the Earth, to be regardless of what nation you're from, what race you are, what sex or gender you are. It was a unifier. And the show doesn't really do much about Earth in and of itself. You just are always believing that on Earth there's no money, nobody's poor, nobody's starving, everybody's good, and there's no attempt to thwart that. Essentially, Star Trek in and of itself is a series about foreign relations and trying to bring people into the fold and getting them on board with what the Federation does. But when it looks into what Earth is doing, it's all very positive. It's a very positive future. They want to bring people into that kind of society because finally it's worked out for everyone. And even Star Trek to a certain point, which you find out in First Contact, is a little bit post-apocalyptic. There was another great war. It's another one of those situations where what are we ultimately going to do to stave off extinction of humanity? And the most brilliant thing about it is they decided to look to the skies. They went into space. They were doing something that like in 1950s, 60s American society really brought this country together, which was explore what's out there, to give people a vision of something that they can dream about or aspire to. And Star Trek brilliantly brings in a utopian society without giving it the immoral baggage, without giving that ulterior motive of really seeking power through control. It's something that no other thing has duplicated, and honestly, I don't believe because of the cynicism that exists anymore, no one will duplicate. If they want to go to that type of society, they're always going to go back to the original one that did it, and that is Star Trek. And that's why we're seeing the continuation of the film franchise, even going back to somewhat the original members of the crew. And now we're going to see another Star Trek series come out. I think it's going to be on CBS, ABC, something like that. They're getting new crews. They want to make it the old, like, Kirk days. I don't think it's going to be further into the future past where Voyager was at. But they're going to continue on with that. So that's always one thing in the midst of the Soylent Green and the Logan's Run and the Demolition Man and Equilibrium and all those ones, there's Star Trek that stands out above the rest. And I think that's awesome.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Good stuff on the show. We just got done talking about the utopian future of Earth. Now we're going to talk about the other end of the spectrum, the dystopian or post-apocalyptic future. Very exciting stuff. This is really the stuff that's ruled the roost as far as film and television has gone in the past 20 or so years. Ever since Blade Runner. You got to give a hand to Blade Runner. A lot of future films, if they weren't invasion, if they were taking place in the future, up until 82, were very futuristically utopian with the flashy suits and all that crazy stuff. Then Blade Runner came and chopped it all down. It showed us an Earth that was overpopulated, very dirty, very dark, very advertisement-driven. Basically sort of a system that was run by corporation. Now, a lot of people want to throw in The Matrix as being dystopian. I disagree. I think it's more post-apocalyptic. If you look at what dystopian future is supposed to be, there is still a formal system that's in place, but society is in disarray. The Matrix, in and of itself, is a post-apocalyptic look at what mankind has had to do in the future to stave off extinction from the robots. They are living underground. There's a society there, but it's still post-apocalypse. It's not dystopian. I'm sorry. And if you want to talk about the Matrix in and of itself, inside the Matrix, if that's dystopian, no, it's just modern society, unless you believe the modern society is dystopian. But that's another question for another time. If you look at dystopia, okay, Blade Runner, one that comes to mind that's as a recent franchise, The Hunger Games. That is dystopian as well. There is a formal system in place, and then we see the districts that are otherwise poor and disarray. That is dystopian. I, Robot, which is supposed to be a prelude to The Matrix, there's supposed to be the source material that those come from are written by the same guy, supposed to be sort of hand in hand with each other. iRobot could be considered dystopian. It's a future world. Robots are becoming more integrated. Nothing really, I mean, everybody just seems to go about their business. Maybe not be able to argue for that one as far as the future Earth, but it's definitely not utopian. That's for sure. Now, when you look at the difference between a dystopian and a post-apocalyptic Earth, okay, as I mentioned before, the system is the number one driving thing. There's still a country. Escape from New York is a dystopian. Escape from New York is the perfect example of dystopian, where there's still the U.S. that exists, but then there is the things that we've had to do to maintain order, which was turning New York City into one giant prison. If you guys haven't seen it, John Carpenter made a fantastic movie. And one of the best things about it is clearly didn't have the budget that it really wanted to have in order to make, but he was like, I don't care, I want to make this movie. It's Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken. Fantastic. And it's a shame because I think you can see Escape from LA, which is laughably bad. That one's either on Netflix or Amazon Prime, but I wish they would put Escape from New York on there. That one is a classic dystopian future and really fun to watch. Kurt Russell breaks out in that one, as well as, Big Trouble in Little China, all those other ones. Great in that movie. Snake Plissken's a great dystopian anti-hero character. He's fantastic. So that, in comparison to post-apocalypse, is what's really in nowadays. Book of Eli, Mad Max, anything involving a zombie apocalypse. So we're talking about The Walking Dead, which is one of the biggest shows on TV right now. That's post-apocalypse to an extent. That's it. It's after civilization, after society. That is what an apocalypse really is. So that one is really, The Walking Dead is huge. As I mentioned before about the 100, that's post-apocalyptic. What happens on Earth, it becomes very tribal once they start re-inhabiting it. Very interesting look at the idea of there being apocalypse, but not everything's desert. Because when you get into one of the more famous post-apocalyptic looks is Mad Max. And more interesting enough on top of that is the apocalypse occurs between the first and the second movie. The first movie, Mad Max, the original just titled Mad Max, that is a dystopian future. And then when you watch The Road Warrior, it just picks up, oh yeah, by the way, between these two flicks, Earth's destroyed, everything's gone. Now all of a sudden, there's a gas shortage. It's just in the desert. People are wearing football pads for no reason, and it's all crazy. But the idea that's really fun is when you watch The Road Warrior, and it's supposed to be just over the top, kind of crazy, but the characters that they bring into it have no excuse for being that particularly weird, because Mad Max existed in the first Mad Max, where it was just a dystopian future. And the bad guy in it was really, he was kind of weird, but there was a society there. And then the apocalypse occurred, but Mad Max is still alive. He's not that much older. So all these people like Lord Humongous and then all of his cronies, they would have had to have been alive too. They would have had to have seen and been through and lived through the Earth before there was the apocalypse, and now he's wearing, you know, a hockey mask and diapers. Like, what happened to him? Just the logical leap between that and from Mad Max into the Road Warriors is crazy. And then it only got more crazy as Fury Road came out. Very exciting movie. I didn't think it was as fantastic as, like, it was the greatest movie of the year. So I didn't think it was all of that wonder. I mean, it was a fun movie, but I wouldn't say it was and I can't really think of one that was really better, but I would put that movie up there as being the best of the year. Well, you know, Tom Hardy's my boy. He's one of my man crushes for sure. I had more of a crush on Tom Hardy than I do with Charlize Theron. But that movie was really fun, post-apocalyptic, and what's another cool aspect about what you can do with a post-apocalyptic environment and having your hero be somebody like Mad Max is it sort of reincarnates the Western. It brings back the idea of the wandering stranger who lives by his own rules, comes into a place where there's a little bit of a system that's organized and keeping the downtrodden more downtrodden, and he comes in and messes up the program. I like that aspect of it because I find most Westerns to be unwatchable with the exception of a few, but the post-apocalypse gives you a new scene. It gives you the idea of working with new technology and working with something that you don't have to actually be or attempt to be historically accurate about. That's what I think is really great about the post-apocalyptic one. So these are the looks. These are what the future of Earth is providing for us. And then there are some of those in-betweeners where really not much has changed. And it's just like, if you look at like a Back to the Future society where it isn't really much of anything. Although from the looks of Back to the Future 2, it really kind of angles itself more towards becoming a society like you see in Blade Runner. What is on the horizon for Earth? Because a lot of these can be argued for. A lot of these, I honestly think more I think Apocalypse is coming more closely than the idea of a utopian future or dystopian future. And maybe one of those societies will have to be born out of the apocalypse, like it is in so many series and films. It's yet to be seen, but what would you rather work towards? I mean, I frankly would want to work towards something like Star Trek if it could possibly exist. I want to live in a fair and just and great society without a bunch of stuff behind the curtains that's going to cause a bunch of problems. But we'll see. That's been fun. All right, so I've had a blast talking about this stuff with you guys here on the show. I'm going to be back here doing another show, talking about some more fun stuff. It's been a great time. I want to urge you to check us out on GSMCpodcast.com. You can also download the show on iTunes. Follow us on Facebook. You know, that thing you cannot get off of. You can also follow us on Twitter as well. On Facebook, Twitter, the website, and on iTunes. You can also find other quality programs here from Golden State Media Concepts. I've been Drew. You've been great. And I'll hear you next week.